The House on Lane 66 by Oolongteacup. Summary. You just started your last year of college and you need a job badly. When a wanted ad online leads you to the forest surrounding Mount Ebbet to a giant brick house full of monsters, you wonder if this might be worth it. Some of these monsters seem all right, friendly even. Others downright terrifying. But you really need this job. Chapter 1. The Interview. And so, given the aggressive nature of monsters, the Ebbet Segregation Act went into effect in a few short weeks after the earthquake that released them from the underground, giving us humans some peace of mind regarding our safety. Your hand shot up in the air, the sleeve of your green sweater dress falling past your elbow. Your professor's eyes flickered in your direction. You were one of only 3 students in the lecture hall, after all. But he continued to drone on. Shortly after, your professor said, resolutely turning his back on you in favor of the slides on the projector, the embargo on the monster goods was voted on. The ambassador argued against this point, insisting that items imbued with magic could be of use to humanity. So it was that monster goods came to market, though the value of their gold to our national currency is still up for consideration since it's made of pyrite and not actual gold. As the monsters ventured further into the surface, the area around Mount Abbott, once a valued national park, has been given to the Queen of Monsters in an effort to placate her and deter open war. Yet the establishment of monsters' borders, and by extent country, has given rise to negative public opinion. You stood up, the metal feet of your chair squeaking loudly against the stone floor, stubbornly keeping your hand in the air. Your professor flinched at the sudden noise, dropping the remote that controlled the slideshow. He could no longer pretend that he didn't see your hand. "What is it, your professor asked as he retrieved his remote off the floor. You gave him your name, but before you could begin to say anything else, he interrupted. "You can sit down now, thank you. If you have any questions, you can ask after I finish the general overview of our known history with monster kind." "But, Professor," you pressed, wanting answers, "how can you say monsters are dangerous? They've only been on the surface for a few months at most, and humans rarely interact with them. Even the ambassador stated—" "This is not a debate." Your professor huffed and fixed the few flyaway strands of gray hair that were his comb-over. "This particular class is on the history of monster kind since they came to the surface. You cannot argue fact. Stating that monsters are dangerous is an opinion, not a fact. We don't know enough about them to make any assumptions," you argued, aware that the only other 2 students in class were staring at you with barely concealed looks of annoyance. "How can you call this class monster studies if you aren't going to question what the media has already told us? It's speculation. Therefore, it's prejudice just to assume that all monsters are dangerous. And how can you suggest an open war when there haven't even been any reports of attacks?" "That is quite enough!" your professor shouted, his face turning purple. "I am the teacher of this lecture, not you. If you plan on constantly interrupting my lessons, then you should speak to the dean about dropping the course and finding a new one." Reluctantly, you shut your mouth and returned to your seat. Your professor, once the angry plum color of his face returned to normal, turned around to face the projector and continue the lesson. It was stupid, you thought. Stupid that you were getting shot down for asking questions and being curious. The whole reason you took this class instead of women's studies for your liberal arts credit was because you wanted to know more about the beings that appeared after the earthquake. All of their different shapes and sizes. The rumors that they could actually use magic and not just infuse their miraculous items with it. You reminded yourself that it was just the one class. You had dealt with other boorish courses in your prior years at university. One small class, and then you'd officially have a double minor along with your major. Look on the bright side, you reminded yourself. You graduated after this semester. You could probably start looking for internships in your dream job right now. Thinking along those lines, you pulled out your phone beneath your desk and scrolled through the list of notifications. You received a few new emails since class started. One was a reminder from the financial aid office stating that you would be unable to receive your degree if your outstanding balance for the semester was not paid in full before graduation. You picked irritably at the run in your white stocking. Of course, the office wouldn't waste time when asking for money, but when it comes to giving you your payouts for books and supplies, you had to hound the office for weeks before you saw any checks. The other email was from federal aid. You had applied months ago during the winter break of last semester, and they finally got back to you, and your request for a loan had been denied. You groaned and slouched down in your chair. If only you hadn't wasted your first year on a stupid pipe dream, you would have gotten this loan and you would be able to graduate on time. Looking for an internship wasn't just a fun way to pass the uninformative class. You would have to get an actual job, and fast. Living off federal aid had been nice while it lasted, since you could focus completely on your studies, but that had officially run out. What kind of job could you get that you could even qualify for that would pay enough to cover the cost of tuition before the semester's end? Without a degree, you couldn't get your dream job or anything remotely close to it. Still, that didn't change the current situation. You would have to find something, anything, to try and at least have a hope of wearing robes and walking with the other graduating students. The thought of working in retail or, God forbid, fast food until you paid off your debts left a bitter taste in your mouth. If you realistically couldn't pay off your debt in time, you'd have to consider the steps after that. Once you were out of school, you'd have to start paying back all the loans you already took out. Unfortunately, that would make paying off the semester even more difficult. That would prolong getting your degree and getting a better paying job. Not only could you end up paying off the debt for years after the semester ended, there was finding a place to live and the bills that came with that to compound the problem. While you should be paying attention to your professor's lecture, the self-induced panic welling in your chest had you on your phone, searching the internet for a job. There were a couple promising looking ones: a desk job at a bank filing papers, a receptionist opening for a company that made computer chips, and a warehouse position at a glass factory, to name a few. You sent inquiries on openings to them all. There was one job that popped up on your feed that caught your eye, one that made you question if it was too good to be true and therefore a scam. It was a wanted ad for a groundskeeper, only a few weeks old. It paid well and offered on-site housing. You searched for further details and found a picture of a large brick house, rather like an old southern plantation home. There was certainly enough acreage for it to be a plantation if the ad was being honest. Why had no one snatched this up yet if it was a legit opening? Must be monster friendly. You stared at the attachment at the end of the ad, then at the address. It was located on the edge of Mount Ebott, in the forest, right inside the new monster territory. You had your answer. Who could own such a house? If you trusted anything your professor said, it couldn't be monsters. There was enough friction as it was with the human population that one would never be able to buy a house from a realtor. Perhaps it was an older couple, one getting on in years that was unable to tend to their house anymore. Maybe the request asking for monster-friendly people was because they were so close to the border. You sent an email inquiry asking if the position was still available. Who cares if it was close to the monster border? You certainly didn't. In fact, you hoped that you would meet one, a real-life monster. If you did, then you could come back to class and argue with your professor until you were blue in the face that he was just a racist, speciesist, that he was afraid of those who were different to himself. The rest of your morning passed uneventfully. Granted, it was only the first day of class. Your other lectures largely went over the syllabus and class expectations, or they expanded along those lines afterwards with general overviews like monster studies had. You were sitting in the cafeteria helping yourself to a slice of pizza that you'd bought with the loose change at the bottom of your purse when your phone buzzed. You interested? Your heart leapt. It was a responding email from the groundskeeping ad. As you were typing your reply, a voice popped in your head, your dad's voice, from when you were a kid, warning you to be wary of strangers, especially those that contacted you over the internet. You'd already had your own suspicions. This job paid a lot, almost too much. What if these unknown people were trying to lure you in? Humans were capable of terrible things. You erased your half finished reply and typed out a new one that requested that you meet in a public place to discuss details. Almost immediately, you got a reply. Can't really leave the mountain, but if you're worried about something, we can talk outside. Can't leave? A feeling of excitement bubbled up in your chest. The Segregation Act forbids monsters from leaving the borders of Mount Ebott. Could your potential employer be a monster? The house was on the border. It wasn't completely impossible that monsters lived there instead of some old couple. What if the professor was right? What if monsters were violent individuals and you were being naive? You shook the thoughts away from your head. You had been watching the news too and knew that the ambassador, a kid barely in their teens, loved monsters. They trusted them. If they weren't afraid, why should you be? You sent a response to the monster's email, agreeing to meet later that day. With a quick check to the bus routes, you set a time. You just hoped that a 2-hour trip out of the city in the valley would be worth it. The bus stop for Mount Abbott National Forest came close to your destination, but you still had half a mile to walk up the road to reach the brick house and, hopefully, a kind monster who would employ you. Your breath misted in the cold, late winter air, and you pulled your leather jacket tighter around you. One hand was in your pocket, tightly holding onto your pepper spray. It was the only thing you brought with you besides your phone. You had made the choice to leave your backpack and purse in your dorm room. It was better to look like you had nothing on you to avoid becoming a target of muggers. Slightly nervous, your eyes darted at the trees surrounding the road. Nothing moved among them. Nothing disturbed the blanket of snow, yet the hairs on the back of your neck were standing on end. Why did it feel like someone was watching you? There, spotted just a ways ahead, was the reflective green road sign with the number 66 on it. It was the number for the house and also the meeting place for you and your mysterious monster. Possible monster. The email never specified their species, and you were too timid to ask a potentially offensive question. You hurried towards the sign, boots crunching in the snow. You checked the time on your phone as you stood by the sign. 5 o'clock. Just like you'd agreed on, but your potential employer was nowhere in sight. You looked down the long, winding drive that disappeared into the woods, just barely making out the snow-covered brick house in the distance. The lawn and road were clear of any footprints besides your own. Maybe they were running late? You wished they would hurry up. It was a cold day and it was already starting to get dark. Hey there, so you made it. You whipped around at the deep voice behind you and barely suppressed a scream of fright. There, standing in the snow like they'd been there all along, was a skeleton. They had a lazy grin on their skull, their hands were deep in the pockets of their blue hoodie, and you could see the bones of their legs peeking out between the gap of their black basketball shorts and pink slippers. Oh, hello, you stuttered, trying to compose yourself. The white eyelights of the skeleton's socket studied you as you held out your hand and gave your name. You're the one I've been emailing about the groundskeeper job, right? That's me. The skeleton reached out and shook your hand. A loud farting noise echoed across the road, his grin growing. The skeleton pulled his bony hand away to reveal a whoopee cushion taped to his palm. Laughing at the look on your face, he introduced himself. I'm Sans the skeleton. Good to see you know how to greet a new pal. You offered a weak smile in return, not sure how to react. That, and you were still taken aback by Sans' sudden appearance. How did he appear behind you so suddenly? There weren't any tracks in the snow, and you were sure you would have heard him walking up. Is there something on my face? Sans' grin fell as he caught you staring. Unfazed, you continued to stare. Was he really made of bone? How could his face move like that? How could it bend and flex to show expression when bone was normally immobile? Oh, no, sorry, you flushed with embarrassment. It's my first time meeting a monster in person, and I'm not trying to be rude. It's nice to meet you, Sans. The white lights in his sockets flickered as they studied you again. Despite him being a few inches shorter than yourself, Sans' gaze had a way of making you feel small. That's so. I'll try to be gentle then, if it's your first time. You felt your flush deepen. So what made you want the job if you're scared of monsters? Sans asked and stuck his hands back into the pockets of his blue hoodie. I'm not scared. You retaliated. He raised a brow at you. How in the world was he doing that? You hurried to explain. Okay, I admit I'm a bit nervous, but I have no problem with monsters and I need a job. I'm in my last year of college, you see. Funds are getting kind of tight. College, huh? Sans nodded in understanding. My friend Temmie is in a similar boat. Do you have any experience with groundskeeping? Not officially, but I used to garden a lot with my mother before. You choked off, not wanting to continue that sentence. Well, my point is, I'm no stranger to digging in the dirt, and if you have requests on what you want, I know that I can find books at the library to teach me more about landscaping. You'll have time. There won't be any digging around until the ground thaws. Sans nods at all the snow, the lazy grin back on his skull. But I'm sure we can still dig up something for you to do in the meantime, if you take the job, that is. It takes you a moment to catch the subtle word usage. We? Sans nod, gesturing back to the brick house. I live with my brothers. If you're serious about taking the job, you should come meet 'em. He added, the grin on his face stretching. You know, break the ice. You look up the length of the winding drive, the hand in your pocket tightening on your concealed pepper spray. Would it have any effect on someone with no eyes? Sans didn't seem like a violent monster, but was it really a good idea to walk into a stranger's house? Of course, if you don't want it, Sans said, still studying you with those white lights. No, I do. You steel your nerves and nodded, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically, but started to walk down the snow-covered drive all the same. Looking for a way to keep Sans talking and also soothe your nerves, you asked, so the ad mentioned a room, too? Yep, it's in the attic. Sans strolled after you and you slowed your pace to match his meandering. It's out of the way, so you'll have your own space. My brothers can be a bit loud. But the attic is insulated and quiet. You'll have your own bathroom, too, since Pap, Milord, and Edge are the only ones to use the showers routinely. You nodded, liking the sound of that. Studying was hard enough without having to deal with noisy roommates. Speaking of, how many brothers do you have? Just the three? Sans looked at the brick house you were approaching, appraising it. Including me, there's 8 of us. 8! Why else will we need such a big house? Sans shrugged and led the way up to the porch. Suddenly his tone became serious, a complete flip from the laid-back attitude he had presented thus far. So, before I bring you in, I need to make a few things clear. What's that? You stutter, your nerves writhing like eels in your stomach again. First, Sans ticked off the points on his skeletal fingers, my brothers aren't used to humans. We haven't had many visitors in general, never mind someone outside the family living with us before. They're going to be curious about you. I honestly thought a monster would answer my ad, but I guess I'm not as great with the net as I thought. Either way, I'm willing to make arrangements for you and your needs if you're a good fit. Secondly, even though I'll be the one to sign the papers and pay you, my brothers will be the ones to decide if you have the job, not me. And last but not least, try not to stare. Paps will be fine with it, he's pretty understanding, but the others are a bit touchy. You nodded, wondering what kind of personalities his brothers had that would make Sans feel like he had to give you a warning. Or maybe you'd been more rude than you realized with your staring. Maybe you should turn back. It wasn't too late. You haven't even entered the house yet. All right, then. Come meet the family. Sans smiled lazily, his laid-back attitude returning, and opened the front door for you. I'm pretty sure they already know you're here. You walked into the spacious entrance hall, making sure to knock the snow from your boots before you crossed the threshold. The entrance hall had a very high ceiling, giving you a view of the second story from the entry, despite the crystal chandelier taking up most of the vast empty space. To your left was a short hall and an archway that led to a spacious living room. It looked to be sunken into the floor by a foot or so, but was filled with squishy-looking chairs and couches and a large flat-screen TV hanging on the wall. Straight down the end of the entryway was another archway that looked to be the kitchen. You could see a gleaming black marble counter and a metal sink with a window above it. Clinking echoed down the hall towards you as someone cooked just out of sight. You could smell cooking tomato sauce drifting into the entryway. To your right was a handsome oak staircase, and as your eyes looked up the wide wooden steps, you spotted a pair of white eye lights watching you from the shadows of the second-story hall. You'd barely made eye contact when the lights vanished further down the hall and out of sight. That'll be Butch. Sans chuckled as you squinted up the staircase, trying to make sure you really saw that or not. He's shy. The fact you saw him at all shows how curious he is. You nodded and took off your wet boots to leave near the front door. In your head, you made a silent mental review to try to remember all the names that Sans had already told you. Butch, Pap, Edge, and Milord. What kind of strange names were those? Of course, you reminded yourself they were monsters. There had to be a cultural difference there. Sans meandered his way into the kitchen, and you made a hasty attempt to catch up to your guide. Sans might still be a stranger to you, but he seemed nice enough, and you didn't want to be by yourself in this house full of unknown monsters. "What's cooking, Paps?" Sans asked. He slid into a seat with a spacious kitchen table tucked off to the side, one with the top of a single solid-looking piece of polished wood and big enough for 8 of his brothers to sit at. Your eyes quickly found another skeleton already sitting nearby, not too far from the seat Sans chose. He looked very much like Sans. They even had the same color hoodie, but this new skeleton's clothes were threadbare and utterly woebegone. From your spot under the archway, you could see beneath the table and noted that he wore gray shorts instead of black. His slippers were a rusted copper color instead of pink. The skeleton must have felt your gaze. He slowly turned his skull to stare at you with a single blood-red light in his left socket. Your heart jumped in your throat, choking a startled scream as you noticed the shattered hole just off-center of the top of his skull, like someone had taken a hammer to it. Remembering Sans' warning, you looked away towards the stove to see who was cooking. Standing there in a pink apron, wearing a white armor and a red scarf, was the tallest creature you'd ever seen, human or monster. The tall skeleton hummed while he stirred a pot vigorously, splashing the walls with red sauce. He spoke with a very loud voice in response to Sans' question. "Spaghetti, my dear brother, what else?" "Well, take a sec and pan the room, Papyrus, and see who I brought." The tall skeleton Papyrus whirled around. Paps must be his nickname, you noted. His white eye lights widened as he spotted you, and the spoon in his hand fell with a clatter to the floor, dropped in surprise. Immediately, the skeleton with the hole in the skull jumped from the table and attacked the spoon. He snatched it off the black and white tile and licked the sauce with a glowing red tongue. "A human!" Paps exclaimed, and crossed the tile floor, easily stepping over the other skeleton like he wasn't there. "But you said you were hiring a monster, Sans." "She was the only one to answer the ad." Sans shrugged from the table, watching with amusement as Pap circled you, examining everything from your leather jacket to your green sweater dress. "And the HOA has been in a pain in the spine in the meantime." "Yes, I know that finding help has been difficult." Papyrus took one of your arms in his red-gloved hands, examining your fingers with interest. You wanted to pull your arm away, but reminded yourself of another of Sans' warnings. These monsters were probably just curious about you as you were of them, and it wasn't like Pap was trying to hurt you. "But do you think it's a good idea with Edge?" "She didn't run away screaming for me, so that's a good sign." Sans yawned and stared at the other blue-hooded skeleton. "Axe, stop licking the floor. You'll drive my lord up the wall if he catches you." "It's nice to meet you, Pap," you said, feeling rather timid to the tall skeleton. You glanced for a moment at the one on the floor, Axe, and wondered if he cared that you were here. Leaving any thought of speaking to him alone for now, you gave Pap your name, and your brain ran on overtime as you tried to think of something polite to say. "Thank you for welcoming to your home. Your spaghetti smells really good." At your words, Pap's chest swelled with pride. "Of course the great Papyrus is a culinary master. You should stay and have some, tiny human." "Monster food won't do anything for her," Sans said. He watched you with growing amusement as Papyrus grabbed your hand and shook vigorously, his enthusiasm momentarily lifting you off the ground. "Nonsense! Her palate should be perfectly capable of appreciating my amazing skills." "I don't mind. I would love to try monster food," you said hurriedly, and glanced at Sans, catching an upward twitch of his smile. Turning back to the tall skeleton, you asked, "Have you ever tried human food, Papyrus?" "Nope." Papyrus turned back to the stove, throwing a box of noodles into the boiling pot. Half of them broke in the process. The cardboard wilted as it hit the boiling water. Well, maybe when I come back I can bring something for you to try. Do you like? Your words were cut short by a squeak of surprise you didn't know you could make. Axe had finally gotten off the floor and was standing quite close to you. Too close. The short skeleton's nasal ridge was inches from your lips. You'll bring food? He asked slowly, his voice deeper baritone than Sans's, but quiet, like he rarely used it. His breath was hot on your face and smelled metallic. He stared expectantly at you, and it felt like that single red eye light of his was staring into your soul. Sure. You nervously took a step back, but Axe matched you. He remained too close, and a nervous sweat started to break out on the back of your neck. I'm not really good with main courses, but I studied baking and pastry in my first year in college. I can make pretty good sweets if you like that sort of thing. We don't want you back here. Your head turned so fast you felt your neck crick. Standing behind you, leaning against the wall of the entryway, was another skeleton. This one just barely taller than you. His crimson eyelights were narrowed to a menacing glare, and his sharp teeth were twisted into a furious scowl. You noted that one of his top left fangs was gold. He wore a black hoodie with white fur lining, unzipped so that you could see his red turtleneck and black shorts. The laces of his red sneakers were not tied. He stormed over to you, and Axe backed away to hide under the table. "You hear me?" he growled, getting in your face just as Axe had, but instead of making you uncomfortable, the skeleton scared you, and you took a step back. A warning bell went off in your head not to push your luck with this one. "We don't want you here. Get the fuck out." "Ah, don't be such a pain, Red." You turned your head back towards the table, and a new, raspy voice. Another skeleton had appeared in the seat next to Sans. When did he get there? Nobody passed you. They couldn't have. Not with you and the scary skeleton blocking the archway. You quickly looked around, searching for an explanation, and glimpsed a short hall to the right of the kitchen. The door was closed, but you guessed it had a set of stairs leading down into what had to be the basement. Maybe he'd come up from that way? This other new skeleton was tall, like Papyrus, but at least a head shorter if you had to guess from his slouched posture. His red eyelights flickered in a sleepy kind of way, contradicting the frightening pointed fangs he had. He also had a golden fang, like the cranky skeletons, but on his lower jaw. He wore a black hoodie with orange-yellow fur, unzipped to reveal a frumpy orange sweater, and you could just make out a pair of baggy black sweatpants beneath the table. "Shut up, Mutt. Ain't no one asked for your input." "And who asked for you to be an ass today? But you still do it," the tall, golden-toothed skeleton drawled in a raspy voice, pulling out both a black cigarette from a pack and lighter from the pockets of his hoodie. "Every day now that I think about it. No smoking in the house!" Papyrus, if possible, given his seemingly normal way of speech, yelled loudly and flicked a spoon at Mutt. Spaghetti sauce splattered all over the table. Axe eagerly leapt out of his hiding spot to clean up with his glowing tongue. "Fuck smoking in the house! There ain't no way some damn human's gonna stay here!" Red shouted back at no one in particular. You felt your knees begin to shake as the atmosphere in the kitchen became increasingly hostile with Red's arrival. He stormed into the kitchen, shoving you roughly out of his way to scream obscenities at Sans. Sans' white eyelights seemed to glaze over if he gave off the impression of being both bored and amused by his brother's temper. Being so focused on Red's rage, you didn't notice that Mutt had left the table and jumped as he touched your shoulder. His fanged smile somehow quirked into a smirk, and he bent over to whisper in your ear, "Want to come outside for a bit with me? You know, see the grounds and all that?" You nodded vigorously, thankful for an excuse to leave the room seconds before Red picked up a chair to throw. You could hear Papyrus shouting at him as you pulled on your boots and raced out the door after Mutt. The outside was blissfully quiet, and you never appreciated the dark, snowy woods before. A click sounded next to you, and you turned just in time to watch Mutt light up the black cigarette. He inhaled deeply, how did he do that without lungs? And let the purple smoke leak from his mouth and eye sockets. It smelled sweet, not like the tobacco you knew at all, and you found yourself breathing deep. It must be some kind of monster tobacco to not stink the way you knew cigarettes did normally. "Shall we?" Mutt gestured towards the woods with the cherry amber end of his cigarette. You nodded and pulled your leather jacket tightly around your shoulders. As you were given a lackadaisical tour of the perimeter surrounding the immediate yard, Mutt explained to you that the house also included the surrounding 50 acres. However, regarding your job description, you wouldn't have to do anything with the woods if you didn't want to. So, if it's just the immediate yard, you asked as you stopped by the garden shed and back, hoping that you weren't about to shoot yourself in the foot with the question, why do you need a groundskeeper? Mutt studied you for a moment with his red eyelights. He flipped the spent cigarette butt into his mouth with a glowing burnt orange tongue and, to your disgust, swallowed it before answering. Does it look like we know how to keep a lawn? Pap cooks and the Lord cleans, but that's about it. The HOA is getting on Sans' case for not mowing or shoveling, and while Sans can do it, he's incredibly inconsistent with it, or flat out doesn't want to. It's not like it's hard, you mumble, wishing you could take back those words almost immediately after saying them. Catching Mutt's grin, you say quickly, but I want the job. I don't mind that kind of work at all. Good. I was starting to think you were trying to weasel out of it. Mutt's grin widened as he lit another black cigarette. After taking a deep drag, he asked, so, what do you think? Well, it's a big yard, but as long as you have the right equipment, I should manage just fine. Not the lawn, Mutt chuckled, then gestured towards the big brick house with a nod of his head. I meant my brother's. Oh, you bit your lip, wondering what to say. If honesty was the best policy here, but if you were going to take this job, you would be living with everyone, so it wouldn't do you any good to lie. They seem nice enough. I really like all of you, but I understand that Red hates me already, so maybe it isn't such a good idea. Nah, Red likes you enough. Mutt waved your words away with a large skeleton hand. Your mouth fell open in surprise, and he laughed at it. I mean it. If Red really didn't like you, you'd know. He tried to throw a chair at me, you grumbled, casting a mean glare at the back window of the kitchen, where you could just make out Papyrus putting Red in a chokehold as he kicked and, judging by the red tint of his skull, yelled. Yeah, Red can be difficult, Mutt nodded, following your gaze. So can Milord and Edge, but they mostly hate each other, so you don't have to worry about them. Pap mentioned Edge. You looked up at Mutt, a squirming feeling in your gut. He asked Sans if it was a good idea having me here with him. Is he going to hate me right off the bat, like Red? Mutt didn't say anything and stared off into the trees, purple smoke leaking from between his pointed teeth. It was a long while before he said, He'll come around. I don't think he can hate you for long. You're too nice. So he will hate me. You let out a heavy sigh. Guess prejudices exist on both sides. We've never even met. You shuffled nervously, wondering how this Edge would act around you. You hadn't even met Edge yet, but from the way he had been talked about so far, if Red was any indication, and he supposedly liked you somewhat, it couldn't be good. Don't worry about Edge, Lord. Mutt ate his cigarette butt and lit another. He hates everything and enjoys complaining about it. But if you want this job and move in, we'll take care of you. Just ask any of us for help if Edge gets in your case. Granted, Mutt exhaled, sending a plume of purple smoke up into the dead branches above. He works a lot, so you won't see him much outside of the weekends. He works? You asked, your curiosity ignited. What kind of jobs do monsters have? Meh, same as humans, I guess. Mutt smiled and held his cigarette in between his pointed teeth, then ran his fingers through your hair. You stiffened at the touch, but it didn't seem to you like anything more than curiosity. Pap had done something similar in the kitchen with your hand before he shook it. Skeletons, after all, did not have hair or skin, so curiosity was natural. As Mutt twirled a lock of your hair between his bony fingers, he said, Edge and Milord work for the Royal Guard. I work from home, and Sans does whatever he does for work. I'm not too sure, since he doesn't seem to have any kind of set schedule. I thought you guys were loaded. You caught Mutt's hand before he could comb his bony fingers through your hair again. He didn't pull away, only watched you, so you curiously pulled it closer to examine. His hand was surprisingly warm to the touch. How did the bone stay connected without muscle and other tissue? All the joints fit together seamlessly, like magic glued it all together. With a jolt, you realized that probably what it was. Sans is he bought the house, but just 'cause the gold is there doesn't mean we can live off it forever. Not to mention some of my brother's pride won't let them just kick back and relax. So they work to contribute. Mutt continued to watch you closely as you gently flexed his fingers in and out of a fist, feeling the way they moved on your own. His cigarette had gone out and he ate that one too, but his burnt orange tongue pushed thoughtfully at the tip of his golden tooth. Then he caught your hand in his. "You're really not scared of us, are you?" "Oh, you dropped his hand, face flushing. "No, not really. I mean, maybe red, but not the rest of you for a first impression. I mean, I'm curious, I admit that, and I'm sorry if I crossed any boundaries just now. I'm really not trying to offend anyone, so if I did something stupid." Mutt cut you off with a bark of laughter. It was a raspy noise like the crumbling of fall leaves that made it apparent just how long he'd been a smoker. His red eyelights looked back at you, holding your gaze, and then darted down to your chest to linger. You felt your flush deepen and crossed your arms to cover yourself. "Kindness, huh?" He trailed off and stuffed his hands back into his pockets of his black hoodie. Mutt loped back towards the house without any invitation for you to follow, but follow you did, since the alternative was being left alone in the dark woods. The inside of the house was a cacophony of activity. From what you could hear as you took off your boots, Mutt had worn his socks outside and left a trail of snow into the kitchen. Red was still trying to argue with Sans, while Papyrus was attempting to get everyone to sit for dinner. "Ah, Mutt and the human, you're just in time." Papyrus smiled broadly as you and Mutt entered the kitchen. You glanced at the table and noticed that it was set for 7. While you were counting plates, you caught a glimpse of a tall skeleton in a red hoodie sitting at the table. But before you could catch any more details, you blinked and he was gone. Sans caught your eye and patted the open seat that you'd been staring at between himself and Axe, which you graciously accepted. "That's Butch's spot," Axe grumbled. His words left him in a slow yet deliberate manner, while his singular red eyelight glared at you. You shifted uncomfortably, also catching Red's glare from across the table. "Well, if he wants dinner, there's another place set for him if he wants to come down, or he can eat when Milord and Edge get home from work," Papyrus stated cheerfully as he served everyone spaghetti. You could see bits of cardboard amongst the sauce. "It's uncivilized to eat in one's bedroom." "Don't want him hungry," Axe growled to his plate. You felt your heart clench painfully. How often, when you were a kid, had you been sent to your room without dinner as punishment? This wasn't the same sort of instance, yet the feeling of empathy was made worse when you realized that it was because Butch was shy, possibly frightened of you. He shouldn't go without because he'd done something wrong. How often did the tables turn like that a monster was scared of a human? "Pap, can I take a plate up to him?" you ask the tall chef. He watches you with scrutinizing gaze, and you hasten to explain. "I know you think it's uncivilized, but Butch is up there because he's scared of meeting me, isn't it? If I bring him dinner, I can try to introduce myself, and then maybe he might see that there's nothing to be afraid of." "Aw, let her, Pap." Sans caught your gaze and smiled. Then again, he might not mean anything by it because he was always smiling. "Butch gotta move pasta this." "Really, Sans?" Papyrus rolls his eyelids, but still thrusts a plate of spaghetti and a spoon into your hands. "No puns at the table. You're insatiable." "Just feeling a bit saucy today." Sans' eyelids seemed to flicker at you in a way that suggested a wink, and Mutt laughed. You smiled too, appreciating the jokes. Pap grumbled under his breath as he offered you another plate of steaming spaghetti for Butch. With that, you left the kitchen with your peace offering, well aware that Axe was following you out with his intense, one-lighted gaze. You knew that Butch's bedroom must be at the top of the stairs. That's where you'd first caught a glimpse of him. But which bedroom was his? There were 6 doors, some with various decorations on them, but you had no idea which one belonged to who. "Butch," you gently called out the landing, examining the door with a caution sticker and tape plastered all over it. "You there? I brought you dinner." The landing responded with silence. You were feeling discouraged, wondering if you should just go back downstairs, when a door at the left end of the hall cracked open. You spotted a single white eyelight watching you. "Hey there!" You must have said that a little too loudly, because the door snapped back shut. At least you knew what door was his now. You crossed the length of the hall to the very last door and sat outside of it, a plate of spaghetti in your hands. "It's okay, Butch. You don't have to come out if you don't want to. Sorry if I startled you. Would you still like your dinner? Pap was saying that you can still eat later if you prefer that, when your brothers get home from work." The door cracked open again, though void of any white eyelights. You set the plate and spoon on the floor and withdrew. Quick as a flash, a skeleton hand grabbed the plate and dragged it inside before shutting the door with another snap. You smile. You must have some pretty big social anxiety if you can't even be on the same side of a door as you. That must mean this is progress. You sat beneath the ledge of the tall window at the end of the hall, crossed your legs, and introduced yourself to Butch, starting with your name and why you wanted to work at his home. Every word that came from out of your mouth was soft, gentle, like you were trying to calm a spooked horse. "You know, Butch, I'm really glad I got to meet your brothers. Today's been amazing. Everyone seems nice, except maybe for Red. But I guess I don't have to tell you that, do I? Can you believe that Mutt told me Red actually has some weird like for me? Can you believe that?" You laugh at your own rhetorical questions. The mirth quickly died down as your thoughts went elsewhere. "It kind of makes me a bit nervous about meeting Milord and Edge, though. But you live here just fine with them, don't you? Maybe they might not like me at first because I'm human, but I don't really think I can blame them for feelings like that. I just hope that I can prove any assumptions wrong." Your eyes catch a movement of shadow from the crack under the door. Butch must have leaned against it to listen to your one-sided conversation. Feeling encouraged, you smile and continue. "I like it here. You're all strange, but in a good way, and I just know that with all the personalities I've seen so far, that time here would never be boring. I really would like it a lot if I could work for you. Maybe if I don't, would you mind if I come back to visit? I promised Pap that I would. I told him I owe him some kind of treat for making dinner for me. Pastries are a specialty of mine. I used to make them all the time with my mom. When I was younger, she actually wanted me to be a pastry chef when I started college. But I only ever studied it for 1 year before switching my major. Do you like sweets, Butch?" "Yes." The voice is faint, barely discernible from behind the door, but you heard it all the same. Your smile widened. "I know I said I would make it for Pap." You leaned against Butch's door so he could hear your soft voice too. "But I wouldn't mind changing it a little bit if you like it too. It'll be our little secret. What's your favorite? If I can make you anything at all." You hear a mumble beyond the door and you didn't quite catch. "What's that?" you asked and pressed your ear against the wooden door. "Red velvet cake." "Gotcha." You pulled at the hem of your green sweater dress as you stood, smoothing the bell and covering your legs back up. "I can make red velvet cupcakes with buttercream frosting, then, so that you and your brothers can each have your own. Lord knows it's hard enough to cut a single cake evenly, never mind between 8 people. Or 9, if I can have some too. Does that sound good to you?" There's a mumble beyond the door, but you can't make it out. You assume Butch likes the idea based on the climbing scale and the tone alone. "All right, it's a plan. I gotta get back downstairs now. I'm sure Pap is waiting for me to try his food. It was nice meeting you, Butch." You saw Butch push his plate out from the crack under the door, completely licked clean, and the spoon with it. With a smile, you retrieved the dishes and made your way back. Halfway down the second-story hall, Red crest at the top of the stairs. He spotted you and you froze, unsure what to do or say, as he's still radiating a malevolent sort of vibe, like a bully that has spotted a lone target by the lockers. He scowled at you and stomped away down to the end of the hall opposite of Butch's room and yanked open the second-to-last door. He slipped inside and slammed it shut with enough force to shake the walls. "So, how'd it go?" Sands asked as you re-entered the kitchen and put Butch's dishes in the pristine metal sink. "Well, I think." You smile as you take a seat before your cooled plate of spaghetti, which Axe had been eyeing hopefully. "We talked a little bit, and he ate." "You mean you talked and he listened?" Papyrus sat at the table as well, watching you as you took your first bite of food. His expression was expectant. Beside him, Mutt had his skull pressed against the table and was snoozing softly. No, we had a small back and forth. You wondered to yourself if the 3 words Butch had said really counted as a conversation. You mean he actually spoke to you? Sans eyelights widened as you took your first bite of pasta. It didn't taste all that bad once you chewed past the cardboard. You nodded, trying to chew your food thoroughly so you wouldn't choke, and spoke with chipmunk cheeks. It seemed more rude not to answer the question, given that Sans made it clear his brothers were the ones to decide if you got the job. I told him I was going to make a cake for Pap, and he told me he likes sweets too. You were about to add that you also knew his favorite sweet, but caught yourself just in time. That was supposed to be a secret, after all. Well, I'll be. Sans leaned back against the table on one elbow and watched you with a strange look in his socket. The lights looked almost soft, like you were viewing them through frosted glass. Well, what do you think, human? Papyrus asked, his words snappy as you finished your second mouthful of spaghetti. His expression looked almost hurt that you hadn't said something about his cooking sooner. You swallowed a little too quickly in your effort to spare his feelings. Your eyes watered a bit from the cardboard scratching at your throat on the way down, and said, "It's great, Pap, thank you." Papyrus smiled at you fondly, the orange blush creeping onto his cheekbones. He must have been taking the tears in your eyes for something else. "I like this human," he said matter-of-factly to Sans. "We should keep her." "Second that," Mutt mumbled and raised his hand half-heartedly, his face still planted against the table. You wondered how long he'd been awake, if he'd actually dozed off at all. "I like her too," Axe said from his seat by your side. His red eyelight watched every move your fork made as you ate. It made you uncomfortable to have an audience while you tried to finish your plate. "Same." You turned your head towards the archway, recognizing the soft voice, and saw what could only be Butch as he tried to hide from your gaze behind the frame of the archway. He was tall, like Papyrus and Mutt, though he looked shorter than Mutt to you, with soft white eyelids that watched you anxiously. Many of his flat teeth were jagged and broken, and he wore a threadbare red hoodie along with a pair of black sweatpants, ones that were also worn but seemed to fit Butch better compared to Mutt's and his pair. "Hey, little bro." Axe turned away from you for the first time since you started eating to smile at Butch. "Still hungry?" "Of course he is. He's always hungry." Papyrus huffed, but still got out of his chair to fix a second plate all the same. You couldn't help but spot the broad smile on his face as he turned back towards the pot on the stove, and knew that he enjoyed having someone around who couldn't get enough of his food. "You done with that?" Axe asked you as you set down your fork next to your empty plate. You shrugged, wondering if he was asking if you wanted seconds or to take your plate to the sink. It was neither option. Axe grabbed your still saucy plate and licked it clean with a swirling swipe of his glowing red tongue. "If you're still hungry," you said slowly, not wanting to offend his reasons for doing what he did, "why don't you ask Pap for another serving? Don't waste food." Axe mumbled from behind the plate. His determination to not waste even a single drop of sauce kind of unnerved you, but it's not like he was hurting anything. He was just strange. Maybe the brothers had fallen on hard times before Sans had come into his gold, and that was why Axe didn't like the thought of wasting food. Or maybe he simply really, really liked tomato sauce. You could remember plenty of times where you licked spare cake frosting from your plate or slurped up melted ice cream out of your empty bowl. Since dinner was over, you reached into your pocket and pulled out your phone. The sky beyond the kitchen window was dark. It had been for a while, as was the norm for winter season, but you hadn't seen a single clock since you entered the house. You checked the time and let out a screech of despair. Papyrus and Sans jumped at the noise. Axe dropped the now clean plate in surprise, shattering it on the floor. Butch somehow vanished completely. "Where's the fire?" Mutt asked sleepily, his skull jerking up from the table. Dropping your phone onto the table, you groaned and let your head bang onto it in a spot-on impression of Mutt. "It's past 9, you grumble. How had the time gone by so quickly? The buses stop running this far at 8, and I don't have enough cash for a cab." "Well, that works out fine then." Sans poked you in the arm, and you rolled over to face him. "Sounds like the majority of the house likes you, kid. There's a room in the attic for you, if you want to try spending the night." "But I haven't met Milord or Edge yet." You lifted your face off the table and looked around the room at all the grinning skeletons, except for Mutt, who had miraculously fallen asleep again. And what about Red? We'll talk to them. Papyrus smiled was wide as he moved the dirty dishes from the stove onto the sink. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. Sans then led you out of the kitchen, up to the first flight of broad oak stairs to the second-story landing. He guided you past Red's room to the last door in that hall, and then opened it to reveal another flight of stairs. He flicked a switch at the base, and a light flowed into the staircase from above. These stairs were narrow, with a high ceiling like the rest of the house, and Sans showed you up them to a spacious loft in the attic. The attic ceiling slanted at sharp angles. It was like being inside a giant tent. There was a large circular window at the far end that gave you a great view of the backyard, the wood beyond, and the star-strewn sky. Currently the only furniture was a singular king-size bed made up with cream-colored sheets. It's not much, Sans said as you looked around the room. Just the bare bones, but it's warm and quiet. If you end up taking the job, I can get some other furniture for you. You'll just have to remind me. I thought I had it, you asked and spun around, eyeing Sans with uncertainty. The job. Your brother seemed to approve of me. Sans merely shrugged and said, You haven't met Edge and Milord yet. You might change your mind. Better get that over with first before you make your choice. After all, even if we want you to work for us, that doesn't mean you're obligated to accept. Well, thanks for letting me spend the night at least. I really appreciate it. You dropped your leather jacket onto the bed and looked around the bare room. This was much better than trying to sleep at the bus stop until morning. There were predatory animals roaming the mountains that you did not want to put yourself at the mercy of, even though you were well aware it was your own neglect of the time that landed you in this position. Sans, do you think could I trouble you some more for something to wear to bed? I'd be grateful for an old pair of sweatpants. I wouldn't ask, but my stockings might run if I sleep in them, and I really need those. Sans shrugged. Mutt might have something that'll fit you. Ask him. He's shacked up in the basement. With that, Sans sauntered from the room and left you alone. You sat down on the bed, taking in the bare walls of the room, processing your day. Everyone you'd met so far, with the exception of Red, had been nice. Sure, Axe was a bit strange, what with licking everything clean and watching you with unyielding gaze, but he also seemed harmless. You wanted this job, yet Sans' ominous mention of the two brothers you'd yet to meet had you wondering if something about them really could change your mind. You thought of your school, the degree you were so close to getting, and felt yourself becoming hopeful. This job could make it possible to pay your debt on time. Even if you didn't get your dream job immediately after graduation, the pay Sans was offering you would keep you afloat for a while. What did Mutt say when you were outside together? That they would help you if you asked for it? Did that mean if Edge and Milord were unlikely to warm up to you, that the others would look out for you? You felt a jolt of fear. You didn't want to think that the two other brothers were the kind you needed protection from. They might be bullies, like Red so clearly was. Yet you had faced bullies in the past, in school, and your mother taught you to never show fear and to kill them with kindness. You felt a warm spark inside your chest as you fondly remembered your mother teaching you her special lessons in grade school, how to see things from another perspective and to act with empathy or sympathy in mind. Learning those lessons had taken a while, and you weren't always perfect with your execution, but her methods always worked eventually. Even if your old bullies never ended up liking you, eventually they would leave you alone. They would decide themselves that you weren't worth their effort. Or maybe that was your dad's doing. You'd found out in high school that he'd gone to their houses more than once to talk to their parents. If that didn't work, he taught you how to fight back if the bullies ever got physical. A bitter smile graced your face and held your jacket close, burying your face in the old leather as your eyes stung with tears brought about by the memories. Mom wasn't around to give you advice anymore. Dad wasn't around to protect you or pick you back up when you fell down. If you could give these skeletons every reason not to hate you, then you had nothing to fear. To think you actually had a chance to live with monsters. Elation chased the blues away, making you giddy. How many humans could say that they've done that? In fact, you thought to yourself with a sly grin, You could use this experience as a theme for your thesis paper for monster study. You laughed out loud, imagining the look of incredulity in your professor's face as he read through your experiences. You were not going to let this chance go. The world believed monsters to be violent, dangerous individuals, but you'd already met a handful of them that proved all the prejudice wrong. With a stubborn pride, you wondered, what would the rest of humanity say if they met Sans or Papyrus, Axe or Butch or Mutt? Their arguments just wouldn't hold. You had a chance to prove them wrong, to help a lot of monsters in the process, and if you could just push your point across with your professor, it just might get his course objectives changed. The first step to change for the better would be reteaching the masses. Fear bred in the shadows of the unknown within the mind. It was like handling a phobia. It could be dealt with proper education and gradual exposure therapy. You had more than enough experience with that yourself, but if you could apply it to others' help and their fear of monsters, that could be your thesis for your major. Excited, you bounded down the narrow staircase and flicked off the lights on your way out. If you had to find Mutt, you better do it sooner than later. You had to get to bed if you were going to be up 2 hours earlier than normal to catch the bus back to campus. At the very least, you could use that 2 hour ride to type up the rough ideas for your papers. You were so caught up in your own thoughts that you ran headlong into one of the brothers and fell on top of them. With a jolt of horror, you looked into red, scowling faces, crimson eyelights flashing dangers. "The hell, woman?" he growled, roughly pushing you off him onto the floor. "Why are you still here? Don't you know when to get the fuck out?" "I'm sorry," you squeaked, jumping up and trying to help Red off the ground. He smacked your hand away with his glare intensified. "Get away from me, human!" he snarled, clearly angry that you kept touching him. You took a step back, watching the crimson plasma manifest like miniature thunderclouds. It surrounded his skeletal fingers and dripped onto the floor. The smell of smoke, wood burning, filled the air. You caught the scent in your nose and froze. "Oh my God!" You felt a panic flutter in your chest that turned into overwhelming fear as memories flashed before your eyes, and grabbed Red's hand, ignoring his snarling protests and pulling him down the stairs. "Fire! Sans, Pap, there's a fire somewhere! Everyone get out!" "What's that?" Papyrus poked his head out of the kitchen, his hands donned in rubber gloves and covered in soap. You burst into the kitchen after him, dragging a swearing Red behind you, screaming about fire. Why didn't they understand? You all had to leave immediately. "Get the fuck off me!" Red shouted, yanking his arm out of your grasp, the weird plasma practically gushing off him as he shook with anger. The lights had disappeared from his sockets, leaving them completely dark. A smell of smoke filled your nose, and you couldn't breathe. You were choking. The room was too hot. The flames were licking up the walls as surely as tears filled down your cheeks. "Human, calm down!" You heard Papyrus as if over a great distance. Something touched you, and you were sure it was the house falling apart around you. You screamed and ran out of the entryway, bursting through the door and into the night. You don't know how long you crouched there in the snow, shivering in the cold, your heart hammering in your chest. "You okay?" Lifting your wet face, you saw Mutt and Axe had come to find you. "There's a fire!" Your voice trembled as you spoke, fear still tight in your chest. "Everyone needs to get out. They're gonna die." "There's no fire." Axe slowly shook his head, watching you curiously with a single red light. "He's right." Mutt crouched down next to you, not touching you, but concern was clearly written all over his skull. Axe stood right next to him, close enough that you could see his copper-colored slippers in the dark. "There's no fire in the house. We heard you yelling and checked." "But I smelled smoke." You sniffed and wiped your running nose on a long green sleeve of your sweater dress. "I smelled it. I swear I—" "That was Red's magic." Mutt started to draw out his cigarettes, paused, and returned them to his pocket. "You must have made him angry. There's no actual fire." Your entire body shook from fear and fading adrenaline. Unable to bear the feeling of being alone in the snow anymore, you turned and grabbed Mutt, feeling almost mindless and desperate for the comforting touch of another. He teetered, off balance, and fell back into the snow as you pulled at his arm for something solid and calm to anchor you. Mutt further tensed beneath your touch. I'm sorry, you sobbed into his sleeve, burying your face in it and breathing deep in the scent of cloves to chase away the stink of wood smoke. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. For what? Mutt said after a long while, his voice raspy and quiet. You could hear, you could feel him lift his arm in his hesitation before running his bony fingers through your hair. The gentle sensation slowly calmed you. You sat like that in the snow for a while, your arms around Mutt, letting him brush the fear away from you through your hair. He slowly tried to pull his arm away. When you only tightened your panic hold, he crossed his legs and gradually coaxed you into his lap so that you could get out of the snow. She's calm now, Axe said slowly and crouched next to you and Mutt, his single glowing eyelight focused on your chest as you leaned heavily against the chest of his brother. You better go find Sans, Mutt said to Axe. Tell him what happened. Can't, Axe shook his head. He already left to get them. Mutt cursed under his raspy breath. Then go make sure Red is calmed down before I bring the human back inside. Pap's got it. Axe, Mutt growled, irritation leaking into his voice. Just get in the house. You didn't hear Axe walk away, but you knew he'd gone when Mutt shimmied his hoodie off and wrapped it around you like a blanket. The scent of iron lingered in the frosty air, so out of place, and it helped to bring you further out from under the crushing weight of memory. Won't you get cold? You asked from the nest of Mutt's lap, pulling the vast folds of hoodie closer, even as your teeth chattered and your toes felt numb from the snow already melting on your white stockings. Don't worry about me. You're obviously freezing. You're shaking worse than an overexcited Tem. Mutt mumbled gently, brushing a fresh tear off your cheek and pulling you further into his lap. Skeletons don't feel cold like you do, or warmth, or any physical sensation, really, except, well, never mind that. Even I know what that flesh and magic are different. Oh, you buried yourself deeper into the yellow-orange fur of Mutt's hood, not knowing what to say to that, and let your body rest against his. His ribs were hard beneath his orange turtleneck, but it wasn't uncomfortable. He was warm. So what happened? Mutt asked, trying to sound casual and failing. Did Red go after you? You shook your head. No, I bumped into him coming down the stairs. He got angry, and then I smelled. You let the sentence drift away and took a deep breath to keep yourself calm. You smelled his magic. Mutt spoke when it was clear that you weren't going to start freaking out again, his raspy voice rumbling with anger as he said, So he did attack you. No, you pushed yourself off Mutt's chest to look into his red highlights. It wasn't him. He didn't touch me at all. You mumbled. I'm afraid of fire. Your face reddened with shame as you admitted that your deepest fear to a monster you barely knew. I actually have a phobia of it. You thought you were past this. This was still hard to talk about, yes, but you hadn't had a relapse in ages. That event had been years ago. You'd been through so much therapy to cope with the trauma. You had struggled for ages so that your phobia didn't send you into a panic whenever you were around smokers and their flicks of their lighters, or even if you saw corresponding colors in light to imitate flame. You could even be around campfires now as long as you didn't get too close or stand downwind, since you had yet to really control your fear where scent memory was concerned. So to have that smell sprung on you so suddenly and inside a house, why fire? Mutt asked. His raspy voice was soft, curious, and you could tell he didn't mean any harm with the question. A great pain filled your chest. You tried to shove the memory away. I don't want to talk about it. Mutt didn't ask any more and pulled you closer to him, as if he could squeeze the pain out of you. Does all monster magic smell like that? You asked, a pang of fear running through your heart. If it did, you couldn't be in this house. You couldn't be around that kind of trigger constantly, risking another relapse like the one you just had every day. You weren't strong enough. No. Mutt pulled your head against his chest and started to comb his fingers through your hair again. Something like that is unique to each monster. I forget that you know as little about us as we do of you. That's good. You felt relief flood you. That's not it's not all the same. I like you guys a lot. I really want to stay if you'll all have me, even if I have to be extra careful not to upset Red. Mutt hummed thoughtfully and rested his jaw on top of your head. He held you closer to him, wrapping his arms around your waist to shield you from the biting, icy breeze. I know most of us want you to stay. It's nice listening to your soul. My soul? Yeah. Mutt nodded as you pulled away to look at him. His sharp teeth smiled gently as he ran a thumb along your damp cheek. Like a little robin twittering away. It makes the wintry old house sound like spring. We can all hear it when you're near. If the song changes, it tells us if you're happy or sad or scared. I didn't know. You stared at the dark sky of the galaxy of stars strewn across it and wondered if all human souls sounded like birds. Maybe that's why the monsters hadn't tried to leave Mount Abbott yet. The noise of a city of thousands of human souls clustered together must be deafening. Is that why the brothers preferred their house out in the woods? Hey, Mutt? Hmm? Can you not? I know it's asking a lot. You fiddled with a loose thread on your sweater dress, avoiding his gaze. But can you not tell anyone else about my phobia? I mean, I don't. I don't want to be a problem. Why would it be a problem? Red, you said simply. I don't want him to think I'm scared of him or hate him just because of what his magic smells like. He can't help it, can he? Just like I can't help my soul sounding like a bird or whatever. Mutt looked into your eyes, his own eyelights flickering like confused blinking. After all that, you're worried about Red. Well, yeah, I know I made him mad, and I know I freaked everyone out with all the noise I made. Butch is probably scared of me even more now. You looked over Mutt's shoulder at the dark exterior of the large brick house and the few windows lit up with light from inside. We should get back in. I need to apologize to everyone. Mutt chuckled and stood, lifting your body with ease and carrying you back into the house, bridal style. You really are kindness, aren't you? It was a strange wordage for Mutt to use, but it was clear he was complimenting you. You wrapped your arms around his neck bones and kissed the side of his jaw. Thanks for coming out to take care of me, Mutt. I'm sorry for freaking out like that and grabbing you. It really helped me out. You letting me hold on to you to ground myself, that is. I can't remember the last time someone wanted to hug me while I was like that, and it was nice. Even in the dark, you could see a burnt orange flesh blossom across his cheekbones. Back inside the warm entryway, Papyrus and Axe waited for you. Papyrus was tapping his foot impatiently. Axe was standing extra still at his side. Mutt set you down on the foyer rug, mumbled something about getting you dry clothes, and disappeared into the kitchen. At the top of the stairway, looking out of the shadows of the second floor landing, you could see Butch's white eyelights watching you. Well? Papyrus snapped before you could open your mouth, one of his gloved hands flying through the air to gesture irritation. What happened, human? We have searched the house and found no fire. If this is some kind of prank, it's not very funny. No, it wasn't a prank, Papyrus. You hung your head in shame and stared at the icy wet clinging on the foot of your stockings as you spoke. I'm sorry, everyone. I made a big mistake. I didn't know that Red's magic smelled like, and I thought it was something else. I didn't know magic even had a scent. Mud explained it all to me outside, and I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to scare any of you. Are you scared of him now? Axe asked, his head tilting to the side as he stared at you. Your head snapped up, your cheeks burning with embarrassment. Not at all. Your gaze darted from one skeleton brother to the next, silently begging them to understand. I mean, I'm wary of Red, I'll admit that, but I'm not afraid of any of you. You've all been so nice, and I really hope what happened hasn't ruined my chances of working for you. The skeletons all stared at you for a long moment, then, well, of course you wouldn't be scared of me. Papyrus smiled and ruffled your hair. You stumbled under the weight of his hand and smiled back, feeling like that was his way of accepting your apology. I'm far too amazing to inspire fear, awe, and envy, perhaps, but never fear. Axe didn't say anything to you, but his vacant grin widened ever so slightly. Up on the landing, Butch poked his head out, and you could see his whole face staring down at you. You grinned up at him. He shied away as he nervously smiled back, with his broken teeth turning his grin all lopsided. Mutt strode back into the entryway, a bundle of clothes rolled up beneath his arm. He stuffed the bundle into your hands, avoiding eye contact, and then escaped to the living room to flop face first into one of the brown couches. "Hey, Pap," you tugged at the tall skeleton's red scarf, sheepishly interrupting his rant about how great he was. "Where's the restroom, if I can? I'd like to take a bath and warm up after sitting in the snow. I don't want to catch a cold." Papyrus nodded approvingly and pointed up the stairs. "Yours is right next to the attic door, directly across from Red's room. You'll find soap in there, but not much else to clean yourself with, since none of us have skin or fur." A warm feeling blossomed in your chest as you smiled and you thanked him. Maybe it was unintentional, but Pap had called the bathroom yours, and that made you happy. Pap stared down at you, his cheekbones flushing orange, before he turned right around and went back to the kitchen. It seemed strange to be cooking this late at night, but what else would he be banging those pots around for? You made your way quietly into the living room to thank Mutt for lending you clothes. Unfortunately, he was fast asleep on the couch, his snores just audible through the cushions. Deciding it might be better not to wake him, you took off the hoodie he lent you outside and covered his upper body with it like a blanket. Maybe skeletons couldn't feel cold, but he at least looked a bit more comfortable. As you headed for the stairs, you noted that while he hadn't approached you since your promise of exchanging food with Papyrus, Axe had been watching you from a distance, unblinking, unmoving, with the same almost vacant expression fixed upon his skull, like he was a haunted painting on the wall, observing and withholding judgment. He hadn't moved at all from where he stood, and you apologized earlier. Feeling slightly nervous, you climbed the stairs quickly to find the bathroom. Butch had long since disappeared from the landing, which was fine, you reasoned. He could come to you in his own time, and it was already late. How late, you couldn't tell, since you'd left your phone upstairs, but you really needed to get to bed. You hesitated outside the bathroom door with your hand hovering over the brass knob. You turned and looked at Red's bedroom door, wondering if you should knock on it. Clutching your borrowed clothes to your chest, you turned to face Red's bedroom, your mind debating on what to do. "Hey, Red," you said to the door, deciding on a halfway point in your mind. You weren't going to knock and possibly anger him further, but you still felt that you had to say something. Could he hear your soul, like Mutt said, through his bedroom door? Were you close enough? What did it sound like, even if you had a soul and Mutt wasn't just making that up so you felt better? Could he tell you felt terrible about what happened, that you wanted to make amends? That you didn't want him to hate you? Red, I'm I'm really sorry." Nothing more to say. You turned around and into the bathroom and drew yourself a nice hot bath. The bed in the attic was a little musty from lack of use, but the feather mattress was deliciously comfortable after the day you had. Nestled beneath the cream-colored sheets and wearing an oversized black t-shirt and drowning in the sweatpants you'd borrowed from Mutt, you fell asleep almost as soon as your wet head hit the pillows. At some point in the middle of the night, you sat bolt upright, your chest heaving. You listened hard, unsure what had woken you up. You heard it downstairs. Someone was shouting. A couple of someones were shouting, actually. Something broke? A plate? Glass? You grabbed your phone and checked the time. It was after 4 in the morning. You groped for your leather jacket in the dark and pulled it on, both to make you feel braver and to cover your arms. Then, as quietly as you could manage, you tiptoed across the attic's hardwood floor towards the stairs. You had to stop a few times to roll up Mutt's overly long sweatpants to avoid tripping, and also to help your toes feel your way so that you didn't tumble down the stairs, but you managed to find the stairwell without too much problem. At the bottom of the narrow staircase, you pressed your ear to the closed door, listening hard. "I don't care what you say, you vanilla prick. I don't want it in the house." As if someone cares what you think, you overstuffed pompous. "Say that again, midget. I fucking dare you." "Listen, Edge, I tried to find someone else for months. She's the only one that answered the ad." "You think you could scare me?" A rough voice growled. "You're pathetic. I'd rather have a disgusting human in the house than you vile waste of magic." You heard the sound of breaking glass and a scuffle, and the overwhelming scent of damp wood leak under the attic door and tickle your nose. "Knock it off!" You recognized Sand's deep growl. He seemed so laid back and easy-going when you were around him. He must be really angry if he was shouting like that. The fact that he was angry at all and that it was an obvious fight happening scared you. Edge, if you break one more window, I'm going to have to get serious. Do you hear that? That loud, abrasive voice must belong to Edge. That noise! How can you stand it? Where the hell is it coming from? It's driving me insane. You were always insane, you imbecile. You heard the muted sound of a scuffle again. The smell of damp wood, frost, and gasoline leaked under the attic door. You coughed violently against the unpleasant mixture of scent irritating your throat, trying desperately to clear your airways. The house fell silent. Edge, no! The attic door ripped open and you fell back onto the steps in surprise. Before you stood the angriest skeleton you could ever imagine. He was just as tall as Pop, yet wore all black. A handful of studded leather belts were wrapped around his waist, and a long red scarf tied dangled from his neck. The blazing red lights of his sockets vanished as he stared down at you, his sharp teeth twisted into a snarl. There you are, filth! You were afraid, very afraid, too afraid to cry out or move or do anything except stare in horror at the monster radiating wrath and the stench of gasoline before you. He reached out and picked you up by the scruff of your shirt, lifting you off the floor so that he could stare into your eyes with those black sockets. One socket had a twin pair of deep gouges that ran from his brow down to the top of his jaw, marring the left side of his face. You've made a big mistake coming here, pest! Glancing at the hall, you could see that behind the angry skeleton, Sans, Red, Mutt, and another short skeleton wearing a purple scarf were all gathered. They seemed scared to jump in, scared to make a move and possibly provoke your captor into violence now that he had a hold on you. Your captor twisted his hand, tightening the t-shirt around your neck until the material strangled your air. You gasped for breath, grabbed the red leather gloves holding you, and tried to push them away, but he was far too strong. His scowl turned into a sadistic grin as he took pleasure in your struggle. He brought you closer as he watched you grasp. You kicked feebly, your eyes falling to your leather jacket. Your dad's voice was in your head. Fight back. Desperate, you reached out with your hands and grabbed the only part of the skeleton you thought could possibly be vulnerable, the eye sockets. You dug your fingers into the black void, reaching as deep as you could go, but never feeling the back of his skull. The skeleton roared with pain and threw you at the stairs. Your back hit the steps and you cried out, crumbling as gravity dragged you to the bottom of the narrow stairwell. The other brothers pounced. Your nose was overwhelmed with the onslaught of magic, but you could feel someone grabbing you, gently lifting you off the stairs. There was a feeling of pressing darkness, and then you were someplace else. It smelled like cloves here. Oh, shit, a raspy voice said as the one who spirited you away set you down someplace soft. Shit, shit, shit! You blinked at the low lighting, supplied by a single uncovered bulb hanging in the middle of the ceiling. You gazed around, registering the concrete walls, the piles of dirty laundry, the desk with a computer and chair at the far side of the room. Shit! Mutt? You asked, wincing at the pain in your back as you sat up. There would definitely be bruises there. At the sound of your voice, Mutt rushed to your side. The bulb in the middle of the room swayed as a violent crash echoed upstairs and shook the ceiling. The basement. That's where you had to be. How did you get here? You okay, Robin? Mutt asked, gently touching your face, head, and shoulders. You winced again as his hands ran over your back and ribs. His sockets darkened and his probing touch froze. I'll be okay, you mutter, to stop his renewed check on you from removing your jacket in search of injury. Really, I don't think anything is broken. Why didn't you stay in your room? Mutt growled at you and drew up to his full impressive height. You flinched away at the anger in his raspy voice. He wasn't supposed to find you tonight. Why didn't you stay in your room? I did. You scooted back on the mattress away from Mutt. Your fear began to creep back into the sight of those empty sockets. It was the magic. There was just too many smells, and I just coughed, and he found me. Mutt watched you still, only his skull tilted after a long moment. He heaved a heavy sigh, and the red lights returned to his socket. He ran a bony hand over his face, stopping to scratch at the base of his golden tooth. I'm not mad at you. I hope you know that. Mutt sat at the edge of his bed, keeping his distance. We're all We all knew Edge would be pissed about this. We were just trying to tell him about it tonight so that we could get him to calm down before morning. Then he could meet you and, well, not have anything like this happen. You blinked and saw Butch standing timidly before you, his hands fiddling with the loose threads of his red hoodie. Why did the clove scent in the basement suddenly turn to sweet rot? Found you, he mumbled quietly, anxiously, his white eye lights darting from you to Mutt and back. What's going on upstairs? Mutt asked quickly. Edge is restrained. Butch looked terrified at the thought of it. Sans wants to see the human. Now? Butch nodded at Mutt's question. Just him and her. Mutt scowled. He waved you towards the stairway and out of the sight door at its peak. He refused to look at you. Well, whenever you're ready, Robin. Our dear eldest brother wants to see you. Robin? Neither brother would go upstairs with you. The door out of the basement brought you right into the kitchen, down that little hall you'd seen before. You looked around timidly for Sans, wondering where he was waiting for you. After the tremendous noise of the fight, the ground floor of the house seemed eerily quiet. Edge must not be in this floor any more. Though it was an assumption, it gave you the courage to slowly move out in search of Sans. You found him in the living room. Sans was lying on the couch with an arm over his face, though you could see he wore a lazy, almost mask-like grin. You cleared your throat as you sat in a squishy armchair near the pink slippers of his feet. He lifted an arm just enough to glance at you out of the side of his left socket and then settled back over his face. That could have gone better, huh? You grimaced at Sans' casual tone and nodded. Remembering he couldn't see you with his sockets covered, you said with a note of sarcasm, I guess Edge really likes me, huh? Sans laughed bitterly. If you say so, kid. So, what did you want to talk to me about? Sans sighed. I'm going to take you home. What? You blinked, not quite registering what he said. You heard me. It's too dangerous for you. I knew it was a mistake letting you come here at all. But I can come back tomorrow, right? You asked hopefully. Maybe after Ed just calmed down, he wouldn't mind meeting me, right? Sans drew his arm away from his face and sat to look up at you. You gasped at seeing the cracks in his skull, spiderwebbing out of his right socket. His eyelights had gone out on that side. You really think that's a good idea? Oh my God, Sans, are you okay? You jumped out of your chair towards him, wincing as your back pained you from the sudden motion. I'll be fine. Sans grin fell his remaining eyelight, studying your flinched movements. Paps can heal me up in the morning, but his magic won't work on human injuries. You need to go home. But what about the job offer? Are you stupid? Sans frowned. Or did you hit your head on the stairs, too? Why can't I stay? You sat on the couch next to Sans and on his uninjured side so he could see you. I thought you all liked me, except for Edge and maybe Milord. But I like all of you. Just because one of you hates my guts doesn't mean I should run and hide. You could have died, kid. You can't be here. I don't care. If you guys will have me, I want to stay. You crossed your arms stubbornly. Mutt told me that Edge would come around eventually, and I believe him. There's no reason for him to hate me once he gets to know me. You really did hit your head. Sans scrutinized you with his good eyelight. You just met us all today. Why would you want to stay? You barely know us. You have no reason to get invested in us. How could you respond to that? Was it crazy to say that you already had become invested in this strange group of monsters? Would it be rude to tell Sans that you had to fight fear before and refused to let it rule you? Or was it that you were being selfish and really wanted to be part of a family again after you'd lost your own so long ago, even if it was only as a lowly groundskeeper? Well, I still want the job. You stood up from the couch and brushed the wrinkles out of your borrowed clothes. Sans followed you with a single eyelight, silently judging you. You shouldn't be going anywhere with that injury, Sans. You need to stay here and rest so Papyrus can help you in the morning. What that kind of injury looks like it could permanently blind you. But what do I know about monsters? So let me spend the rest of the night here while you rest, and I can head back to my school in the morning on the bus. Talk all of this over with the others. If you tell me you don't want me after that, then I won't force anything. Without waiting for a response from Sans, you turned to climb back up the many stairs. The bed in the attic may have been soft, but you winced every time you rolled onto your back. End of chapter. If you enjoyed this chapter of House on Lane 66, please go read the original work by Oolongteacup on Archive of Our Own. And if you'd like what I do and wish to support me, subscribe for future updates. Be well, stay safe, and don't forget to drink water.